Okay, we're on. We're good, we're on. Mike's on.
Oh, wait.
I think one goes down on that table. Chandru, I think that one.
You'll hear me.
Oh, you don't have one.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
You wanna make it happen.
It's usually down at the
You can
table.
share.
It's usually down at the table so that we can hear. It should be fine. It should
yeah,
be- It should be fine.
you wanna move down?
You gotta
It should
use
be
that
fine.
one.
I should
It's
be
got the
able
longer wire.
to, as long as your voice
This
is.
one is
No.
really short.
Yeah,
It's
that
the
one.
one in front of Chandru.
Yeah, that's true. So Chandru.
No,
Chandru should
Yeah.
be down at the table.
no.
That one goes down, that one goes down. Shows my hesitation.
And then put that
Yes.
Do a duet.
Okay, there we go. You good? Okay.
We're on.
Change the mic stuff. In accordance with Section 5 of the Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231, Public Law 1975, be advised that a notice of this meeting was made by posting on the bulletin board, town hall, and mailing to the officially designated newspapers a list of the meeting dates annually, indicating that this meeting would take place at Town Hall, 7:30 p.m.
So you have the planning board.
Right, planning board.
It's the same, just 17.
Same thing, just 7 p.m. and
On May 15th.
on Monday, 3/15,
There you go.
2023. All right. So there.
Ashley Abigdor.
Here.
Chandru Harani.
Here.
Gary Rosen.
Here.
Regina Truitt.
Here.
Joseph Caulfield.
Here.
Vice Chairwoman Jessica Glad.
Here.
Chairman Craig Plattner.
Here. So we were not going to approve any minutes today. We're going to move on to memorializations. We have two of those to do. Calendar 39/13/23, Brugia D, 1 West U Road in Short Hills. Any changes or corrections? Who's eligible?
Eligible.
Yeah.
Ashley, Gary, Regina, Joseph, and Craig.
Can I have a motion if there are no changes or corrections?
The one thing that I just want to point out, and I was mentioned to me, and I thought it was a good idea, that somewhere in the resolution, I'm going to, in the recitation of facts, I'm going to mention, just even in a half sentence, that a 4-foot fence would be permitted in the zone.
In that case, you have a motion to adopt that memorialization?
As amended, do I say that?
Yes.
Yes, amended.
As amended, I'd like to make a motion to memorialize calendar number 3913-23.
A second?
I'll second.
Ashley Abigdor,
Yes.
Gary Rosen,
Yes.
Regina Truitt.
Yes.
Joseph Caulfield,
Yes.
Craig Plattner.
Yes. Next up, we have calendar 39/17/23, Rachel Winiger, 29 South Mountain Road, Melbourne, same people.
Yes.
Any changes, corrections to that memorialization? If not, can I have a motion to adopt?
I'll move to approve the memorialization for calendar number 3917-23.
And a second?
Second.
Ashley Abigdor,
Yes.
Gary Rosen.
Yes.
Regina Truitt.
Yes.
Joseph Caulfield,
Yes.
Craig Plattner.
Yes. Okay, so what we're going to start with are the applications that we're not hearing this evening, just because there's a lot on this agenda that we're not hearing. So if you're here tonight on any one of these that I'm going to mention now, I will give you the date as to when they will be heard. So first is calendar 39/14/23. That is David and Lori Schlanger. That's being moved and being carried to 6/5/23, so June 5th at 86 Slope Drive. No further notice will be given on that application. Calendar 39/07/22, M. Miller, G. Plowman, location 79 Chestnut Street. That matter will be heard on June 5th, 2023 also. No further notice will be given. And lastly, calendar 39/16/23, Canuber Country Club at 1108 Mars Turnpike. That matter will be carried to July 17th. So if you're here this evening on that, They'll be coming back on July 17th, and no further notice will be given. Moving on to the application that we will be hearing tonight, that's calendar 391923, Live Breads located at 257 Essex Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board, my name is Anthony Sursillo with the offices of Levitt and Sursillo in Milburn Township on behalf of Live Breads Holdings. Live Breads has 3 locations in Milburn. One at 184 Essex Street. It has a retail kiosk in the mall at Short Hills and a location at 257 Essex Street. In August of this year, Live Breads will celebrate its 5th anniversary in Milburn's downtown. This application involves only 257 Essex Street, which is situated in the central business B4 zoning district. This particular location opened circa June 2021. The subject building, a former garage, is situated very near to the rear lot line. This building has been equipped with 4 internal refrigeration systems, 2 of which are freezers. There's no more space in this building for hardly anything, let alone an additional refrigeration system. Live Breads needs an additional refrigeration system to meet its production and inventory demands. We seek a C variance for an accessory structure, the exterior refrigeration unit that will serve as a freezer. We propose to screen the unit with planters and arborvitae on 3 sides. Proofs of legal service were submitted to the board secretary. I have 1 witness, Richard Keller, as a professional planner and civil engineer, and our client is here as well if there's questions of him for the board. Does the board or council have any questions of me?
Yeah, I have a question. So, in your application, I think we even talked about this, that you reference the section in the ordinance, 66.7C, non-permitted accessory use / structure of the B4 Central Business District. And just so that the board is aware, kind of going in before you present your proofs, just explain to the board why you're seeking a bulk variance as opposed to also seeking a use variance for an accessory use.
We are not seeking a use variance because the existing workshop, Live Breads, is a legally permitted use. It would be a different issue had it been a pre-existing non-conforming use. Therefore, we are seeking simply a bulk variance, not a use variance.
And you think that the fact that this separate structure is detached, that it still falls under the prior approval?
It's an accessory use. The zoning officer declared that it was not, an exterior refrigeration was not incidental or customarily an accessory use, and we needed bulk variance relief.
But if it's not, and I don't mean to be arguing that, but if it's not customary, incidental, or subordinate, then it's not an accessory use, and then you would need a use variance, form of use variance.
We're seeking a variance for an accessory structure, the refrigeration item. Do you want to swear in the zoning officer as to what her ruling was?
We can only do that.
Sure. Eileen? Eric, you want to?
I do swear from the testimony you give in tonight's hearing to be truth, whole truth, nothing but truth.
Yes.
Thank you.
The refrigerated unit, I thought we had agreed was accessory to the Live Breads. which is a permitted use in the zone. The only issue became that we have Live Breads, we have a two-family house, so we do have two principal structures on a lot currently, this being accessory to the Live Breads, which I didn't think fell to a use variance.
Okay, so for it to be accessory to the Live Bread's use, since they received the use variance to maintain two principal uses on a single lot, is it your determination that this use is in fact customary, incidental, and subordinate to the, I guess, the Live
The
Bread's
Live Breads,
use?
specifically the Live Breads use.
All right, thank you.
And do we need a variance now, or is it just because
I'm
it's?
just trying to be protective, that's all. Trying to help you, so.
Thank you,
Okay.
Good.
thank you. Mr. Richard Keller.
Do you swear affirm testimony you're about to give in tonight's proceeding to be the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Name.
Richard Keller, Keller. Business address is 258 Main Street here in Millbrook.
Mr. Keller, give the board the benefit of your academic and professional credentials in professional planning and civil engineering.
Certainly. I'm a licensed engineer and planner in the state of New Jersey for over 33 years. I'm going to stop counting now. I have a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Rutgers University with declared concentration in water resources and environmental engineering. And I also hold a master's degree in architecture from the New Jersey Institute of Technology with a declared concentration in urban planning and design. I also taught at that institution for approximately 11 years in both the graduate and undergraduate divisions, both in planning as well as landscape architecture. I have appeared before this board, the planning board, approximately 110 boards throughout the state of New Jersey. My licenses are still in good effect, just having finished another 12 hours of credits towards next year's license. It's nice to be back.
Your credentials are accepted, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Keller, what did you investigate, review, and in anticipatory of this testimony?
Certainly. Well, we reviewed the master plan as well as the zoning ordinance, including recent updates in 2022 to the master plan, specifically as it relates to accessory uses in the B4 Central Business District. I had the pleasure of helping Live Breads 5 years ago when they came before the board, back before they relaxed the parking variance requirements and they needed a parking variance to get into 184 Essex Street. I had the opportunity to represent them as a business that could be very useful for our downtown, bringing slow food and an amazing quality of food to the downtown, which would actually attract people into our Central Business District. And I will say, after 5 years, that has been a success. Not just the fact that I have coffee there every morning, which I think pays half the bills, but they've been a success in the downtown. I've also been to this site. I did work on the original Teddy's Garage site back in 2008, 2009. And we converted that 1,440 square foot brick building into an adaptive reuse as a restaurant. And we also at that time received use variance approval to have two accessory uses on the same property, that being a two-family home, which I'll show you. Two principal uses on the site, that being the two-family dwelling at the front left of the site, about 6 feet back from the street, and then the old workshop, which was a garage situated all the way at the back of the property to the rear. That use as a permitted conditional use within the zone was approved by the board, and basically back in mid-2021, when Live Breads took over the site as their quote-unquote workshop space, they took over that as a permitted conditional use within the zone as a retail food establishment. Primarily, besides production, it allowed for them retail sales of coffee and limited baked goods in the afternoons. It was also used for special events on the plaza, as well as pickup for holidays and weekends, for pickup of the large amount of holiday work that they do. So that's I've been involved with both this site, this block, almost all the buildings on this block, as well as Live Breads since their inception. So I'm certainly familiar with the genesis and the changes of the ordinance. I understand there's one gentleman who is not here for this application. Can certainly move up, but I wanted to maybe bring the boards up a little bit closer because they'd be easier to see for the board. Basically, I'm going to start with is the site plan application, which you have before you in your packet. The site, as Anthony indicated, is located on the north side of Essex Street. It's about 48 foot wide by approximately 128 foot deep property. It's located about just about 200 feet, 190 feet west of the intersection of Essex with Main Street. The property does have, as indicated, a two-story, two-family dwelling that's about 6 feet back from the street. That's on the left side of the property. And as indicated, that 1,440 square foot footprint building, the brick building, is all the way at the back of the property within 1 feet of the rear of the line. It's biased to the right side, and it's only about 8 feet into the left side, but not large enough actually to get a refrigeration unit back into the left side. The property to the right was the subject of 2 approvals for office buildings, one by the planning board for a 2-story office building, 1-story of office with a mezzanine over parking. Subsequently, they came back and came before the Board of Adjustment to do a combined application where that building would attach into the brick building at the back. That was also approved by this planning board. Neither of those plans became proved to be viable. The lots were never merged, and the approvals have lapsed on that. So that construction site to the right, we are hoping to come back to something in the near future, but right now it is a construction site, and we have the refrigeration unit is biased to that side. Between Anthony's covered a lot of my covered a lot of the information, and I've done a lot of testimony already. As indicated, I don't know if Tony mentioned this. Basically, they were running near occupancy or near maximum space in the existing building with 4 refrigeration units. And then just before Christmas of 2021, one of their large freezers broke down. Supply chains issues were like during the pandemic. There was no ability to get parts in the near future. So as an emergency, they brought in 3 days before Christmas, they brought in an 8 foot by 20 foot by 9.5 foot tall refrigeration unit. The intent was that would be temporary until they could get parts. Turned out not all businesses suffered during the pandemic. Live Breads actually stepped up to the plate. They provided grocery services. They actually expanded their deliveries. They were one of the only bread makers that continually delivered to Whole Foods during the pandemic, the ones they could rely on. They really stepped up to the plate and ramped up production. And as it turns out, once the parts became available to fix the internal refrigerator, their need far expanded beyond the ability of the 4 refrigeration units within the building. So what they're seeking to do today is to get an approval to maintain that in the front of the property. Just to quickly go through what I have is A1. This is labeled photo board number 1. There are 7 photographs. First 1 through 3 on the top were taken by myself this morning, May 15, 2023. And the bottom 4 photographs actually were taken by the applicant on May 9th of 2023. So these accurately represent the site as it is today. You look at the first site on the upper left, first picture is we're traveling northeast or east toward the intersection of Main Street, common lot in the background. You can see the 2-family in the front. There's a Live Bread vehicle in the driveway. And at this point, the 2-family house completely blocks the view of the refrigeration unit. You can just start to see it come into view. So for people walking from Paper Ribbon Wrap or walking from the bookstore or the downtown, or perhaps any of the new people who will be moving into the Wells Fargo site, as they're moving down to the east, the existing building pretty much completely eclipses the visibility of the refrigeration unit. Photograph number 2 is looking straight at the driveway, where you can see there's the Live Bread's workshop sign, the garage door, the service window for takeout and pickups, and you can see the 2-family house, and you can see that the refrigeration unit sits 55 feet back from the street, with the condensed compressor being about 51 feet from the street along the right side of the property. So it allows for visibility of the front door, access, maneuvering of goods into delivery vehicles or to be taken up to the main space at 184 Milburn Avenue. This allows functionality, and we pushed it back as far as we could on the site, or the applicant pushed it back as far as they could on the site when they had it delivered. Going the other direction, you can see the construction fence for the construction site, which is laying dormant at the time. You can see that at the very back is the refrigerated unit. Again, really not something you see in your view shed if you're coming down, and certainly whenever a building gets built. Hopefully, maybe by that time we won't need that, but in the interim, once something does get built, it will completely eclipse any view of that compressor unit. Just to go to the pictures on the inside, these are two of the existing refrigeration freezer units within the structure. This is looking from the back left corner back up towards the exterior refrigeration unit. You can see that these units are all packed in. There's really no room to work. Looking at the front towards the back, there are ovens. There's another refrigeration unit. There's the door out to the secondary emergency egress at the back. Every inch of space in this unit is taken. Looking at photograph number 6, this is the internal refrigeration unit. It's looking at one of these doors here. You can see the racks of frozen goods, and the same on the external unit. You can see that basically it's a narrow alleyway with just racks and racks. About 50% of Live Bread's sales involve materials that are frozen at some point during their operation, whether it's the challah for the holidays, the arugula, the babka. All of that is frozen at some point and then taken out, thawed, baked, or handled, and all of that is stored. So when they do those 3,000 challah for the holiday weekend, they all get frozen and stored in there, so they're ready to be baked and put out for service.
Let's back up.
Yeah.
So this application is replete with proofs and references to a D1 use variance for accessory use. And so the first thing I'd like you to do, Rich, is you heard Ms. Davitt. I want you to first go through as to why, in line with what Mr. Cersillo said, why you don't believe now, notwithstanding the original application, why a use variance is not required as a matter of law. And then I want you to identify for the board what bulk variance relief the applicant is seeking, because it's not referenced in the application.
Well, we did reference the fact that we were, let's take a step back. Years ago, there were no permitted accessory uses in the B4 Central Business District. So other times when we did external refrigerators, since no accessory uses were permitted, we got variance relief. In 2022, the ordinance was changed, and under section 606.7C5, one of the permitted accessory uses is any other use which is subordinate and customarily incidental to a non-residential use. We certainly maintain that refrigeration, whether it's a freezer or refrigerator, is certainly customary and incidental to any bakery operation. So we thought it was actually, we didn't think it needed any use variance at all. However, Ms. Davitt felt that while it may be customarily incidental to the operation, not all bakeries or restaurants have external units in the downtown, although some do. And so therefore, thought it was safest to come to this board for C variance relief for the additional accessory use. We already received a variance for two
Okay.
principally.
Okay, hold on. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Because it's all, I'm trying to help you guys.
Okay.
Create a clean record here.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, for you to proffer that this proposed refrigeration unit as an accessory use is permitted and does not require any form of D or use variance, you have to demonstrate that, as you said, Rich, it's customary, incidental, and subordinate, both under municipal land use law and under local ordinance. So explain why, in this case, having a detached, to your point, refrigeration unit meets all three. It's customary, subordinate, and incidental to the principal use, or one of the principal uses on the lot. Let's start with that.
All right, in terms of, certainly it's customary for this type of use to be on the site. As to whether it's external as customary, it certainly exists in a number of other locations in the downtown and other businesses where I work on, where the refrigeration is accessed from the outside. So it is certainly not uncommon,
And it's detached?
and it's detached. Yeah.
Where are those, just so
We got there's one in town, there's one at Goldberg's Bagels. It's in the back. It's screened by a 8-foot fence, but it is in the back and it is a separate unit from the main building. That's the only one I know in town.
Okay, but you've worked on other applications involving food services where there've been detached refrigeration
It's
units
in Livingston.
in Essex County.
Exactly. So I don't think everyone has it, but I don't think it's necessarily atypical. If you have a building and you can't fit refrigeration in it and you seek to put it on the outside, we don't need a coverage variance. We don't need a building coverage variance. We don't need a setback variance. The accessory use is not in the front yard. It doesn't generate any parking demand. So there are no bulk variances associated with the addition of this external freezer.
Okay, let's stop right there.
Go ahead.
So normally, if there's no use variance
Mhm.
that's permitted,
Correct.
and there's no bulk variance, you're saying, that's permitted. But the only reason why you're before the board is for what? For site plan approval? Because then we don't have,
Doesn't need site plan approval.
it does not.
Does not meet the criteria for site plan approval.
Okay.
So none of that is required.
Okay, so if you don't need a bulk variance, according to the applicant,
Mhm.
you don't need a use variance.
Correct.
You don't need a bulk variance.
Correct.
You don't need site plan approval.
Correct.
What are we doing here?
Well, I think the discussion was, didn't want to go against Eileen's recommendation. And I think in the discussion with our attorney and you felt that it would be safest to notice for a D, so we added some D language. We sort of fluffed it all up so we could get our notice covered and we could be here tonight. It's been we would maintain that it is an accessory use clearly. We maintain that it is customary and incidental to the principal use. We maintain that there are no bulk deviations required, and therefore, we don't need any variance for it.
Accessory structures are only permitted in the rear yard. It doesn't say accessory structures shall not be in the front yard. It says.
Does it say that for this zone, or is that in general?
That's the general, accessory structures shall be in rear yards only. That's kind of,
And the definition of rear yard,
is behind,
the principal
principal-
building
the
to
principal
which it
building.
is accessory, which is not the case here, right?
So I thought that caveat only applied to residential, but if it applies to non-residential as well, then I guess that would be the bulk variance we need, because there's essentially a 1-foot rear yard in this property.
But the point of all this is that you're here
Yep.
for a board of adjustment,
Correct.
and you might as well stay, as they say.
That's kind of what we
Right.
figured, yeah.
Okay, but we need to have jurisdiction over the application.
Okay.
So we're trying to, just give us a second here, we're trying to assist.
well, okay. It just says accessory, any other use which is subordinate and customarily incidental to multifamily housing development. Any other use which is subordinate and customarily incidental to non-residential use is a permitted accessory.
Correct.
So the couple of issues include whether a detached refrigeration unit is customary, incidental, and subordinate to the principal use to which it serves on the lot. And now we're talking about whether, because it is an accessory structure, whether it can be in the front yard without variance relief.
It would be a side yard, but it would be not in a rear yard. It's not in a side yard. It's not in a front yard. Because the front yard is.
No, Rich, I think what Eileen said was that it only can be in the rear yard.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. You'd said it can't be in the front yard. That's it can only be in a rear yard. we think.
Let me ask a question while you're trying to help the board a little bit. In terms of the driveway, it says paver driveway. Can you talk a little bit about access to the building in the rear, given location of refrigeration?
Yeah, in terms of the access, even with the planters, there's about 9 to 10 feet of access to get past the planters into service the building. So there's adequate room for firefighting, there's adequate room for emergency vehicles, should they decide to enter there, most wouldn't, but, so there's still about 10 feet between the fence and the closest part of the planters we're proposing. So there still will be complete access to service the building, for both Live Bread's use as well as customers who come to the site to pick up holiday orders, as well as emergency vehicles.
So explain to the board how the vehicular circulation works with relation to the two-family, to the principal building.
There's no parking on site for the two-family. There never was, nor was it expressed. Currently, vehicles for Live Breads do back in or pull into the driveway. They rarely come all the way down the site, but they will continue to pull in, load back and forth either from the refrigerated unit or through the garage doors onto those trucks that will then pull out forward onto Essex Street. And that's what's been happening since 2021. And that would continue, that operation wouldn't be unchanged.
And customers, patrons, they don't access the site vehicular?
No customers are allowed to come onto the site.
Question, is this refrigeration unit accessed by all 3 units of Live Bread? Is this the storage or refrigeration for all 3 of them?
This meets the demand for, well, there's really 2 other primary sales outlets. There's the cafe at 184 Essex, and then there's the kiosk up at the mall.
Right.
So those, and then there is some window trade here. So yes, this services all 3 of those. There is baking, obviously, also done at the 184 site. So some production is done there, some production is done here, but a lot of the production may be done here for the frozen items may be brought here and then taken over to the 184 site to be baked, packaged, and sold, or sometimes they're baked here for the holiday pickups. It depends on, if you were there for Mother's Day and saw the half-hour line to get in, on the both Easter, Christmas, the Jewish holidays, they move pickup over to this facility. A lot of people park over at the other area or parking lot 1 and walk over to do their pickup, where they park along Essex Street. But for the most part, they share production, and the details I'm not sure about who gets baked when, but mostly it's done by truck, although occasionally in the morning I will see the owner pushing a rack of something down the street to go between one and the other, and I think it's kind of charming, right? Being back in the old in New York in the Flower District. But at any rate, so that's the way it's interchangeable. But this has been an available production site for them to feed all of their buildings.
Can you talk a second about sound mitigation, noise with the compressor, and what the arborvitae is going to do to the trip?
Well, that's why we moved it to the right side, so it's as far away from the two-family as possible. We have had no complaints from the two-family about noise. It is a compressor. It has a hum, but it's not extremely loud.
It's pretty loud. I was there.
It's pretty, yeah, I agree.
It's I know when you come up next to us loud. I don't notice it when I'm on Essex Street. Anytime I've walked up to Paper Ribbon Rapids, a client of mine, I don't notice it then. I notice when I'm standing right next to it. So mitigation, will arborvitae help? They will be planted 5 to 6 feet upon installation. They'll go into a 2-foot high planter that's on 2 sides of that. So they'll be 7 to 9 feet tall on planting. Arborvitae are prized for their screening ability, visual screening, and they will grow up to be as tall as the unit, and they can be well maintained and easily maintained at the same unit. So we'll provide a living wall. A lot of sound studies have shown that perception of sound is tied into is highly tied into a visual component. So when you can see the source, you hear it more than when you don't see the source. So will the arborvitae deaden the sound to some degree? Will it help the sound to be channeled upward to some degree? And also remove the visual component. So it's, like I said, since it's been in, there's not been any complaints from any neighbors. There's nobody to our immediately right at this point. It's as far away from the two families we can get. It's really the only operation. And there are compressor units in the building that come out the side of the wall. There's the two refrigeration units right on the right side, and there's also compressor noise from there. But this, I think that the proposed landscaping will certainly help to mitigate that.
And what's going, I mean, you said lot 15, there's no use there right now?
Lot 15 is an open construction site. They started the footings for the first approval, came back for a second approval, and then stopped construction, decided not to, well, they had started on the first approval, they started construction. They let that fall, so it is basically a construction site, as was evidenced by photograph number 3. You can see the construction fences across the front of the site. That's 251 Essex Street.
What was approved there?
It was originally approved as a second-story office with a mezzanine over a parking lot. And then that was by the planning board. It came back to the Board of Adjustment, where we sought to merge these two lots. So we were going to have a large office building that tied in and connected into the what's now the workshop site, with another means of vertical circulation up at the back. It was a move to get both more parking on the site, as well as to get 2 entry points into the site for better ability to lease the office space to multiple tenants. Obviously, we know what the pandemic has done to office rentals, and I think that whole model has gone down the tubes, and that's why the applicant let the application lapse. They're just starting to talk to us now about planning something to go in there, because it is kind of an eyesore.
I'm sorry I'm asking so many questions, but I'm also
Yeah.
filibustering for Eileen here.
Oh,
She
I
hasn't thanked me yet, so I should. Are you concerned about the lack of setback, meaningful setback between the refrigeration unit / compressor and lot 15 in terms of proposed uses on lot 15?
No. I think one of the things is the building is partially owned by the owner of this property, not wholly, but partially owned by the owner of the Live Breads property. And I think that of the workshop property. So clearly, when it comes time to develop that, I think that the ability to lease that space for the refrigeration unit will probably be modified. Whether they get some production space in the new building, or they have to find alternate production space. Keep in mind that we now allow a 3rd story in the downtown, so whether Live Breads can add a 3rd story and move some production up and get refrigeration in, that all kind of is going to wait to see what we do as a master plan. As I said, because there's some common ownership, I think that developer that's going to be very sensitive to make sure that has no negative impact on his leasability in the future.
Sure. Okay, thanks. Just back to the access question for the driveway. I visited the site on the way here this evening, and it is a fairly narrow driveway. And then I noticed the refrigeration unit. The arborvitae are not there currently, but you're planning to put them in planters that will be on top of the pavement. So arborvitae are famous for growing tall, but they also grow wide. So how are you going to maintain that access with the presence of arborvitae growing?
They can be maintained you can cut them back almost like a hedge, and you can maintain that shape. There's a site on Summit Avenue as you're going to Summit that has a wall of arborvitae where they've actually trimmed them down so they look like columns on the side of each entrance into the driveway, which is completely obscured. But so they are moldable. This was the plant that my licensed landscape architect selected. He has a lot of experience working in urban environments with small root wall areas. So I felt that this species would be the best to thrive there and provide appropriate screening. We did look at doing some wooden fencing. We looked at other options. We felt this would actually be the most attractive and still allow full flexibility and access to the site.
How do you keep them from blowing over?
Well, they'll be planted fairly deep, and you can bind them together if you need to be. I don't suspect that given the location of the existing buildings, you're gonna get a lot of wind on that side that's gonna potentially take them down. Because you've got a much taller site behind us, you've got a two-family on the one side, and the plants on the right side will actually be planted in the soil. So any wind that would come from the east, they'll be anchored into the soil a little better. Any wind in the planters, I think, are well buffered by surrounding buildings and property. And again, my licensed landscape architect went out there a couple times, did the sketch that's on the bottom of the plan, felt that that was the best species. And certainly, we wouldn't recommend that they weren't going to be viable, because I'm assuming that if we need an approval and you approve the project and we have arborvitae, you're going to want a warranty that they must be maintained in perpetuity. So we're certainly aware of that.
Our accessory structure in the ordinance, it does specifically say accessory structure in residential district. So it doesn't specifically point out where an accessory structure in B4 can be located. So I'm kind of trying to, I don't know which way direction, backpedal and say, well, the former ordinance did not permit this as an accessory structure when they permitted parking in urban areas. And we redid it, and now they permit a use which is subordinate and customary incidental. Is it subordinate? Yes. Is it customarily incidental? I think that's.
Well, let me ask you a question. So, is it your position that if this applicant or any applicant, let's just say, wanted to put a detached refrigeration unit in the front yard,
Mhm.
you know, right up against the street with no setback?
How could I prove that? I can't. How can you prove? You can't
Okay.
arbitrarily just.
That's
just it.
sort of my point.
Yeah.
Which is that, but the question is, you would send them where? So if it's a bulk variance, right? It potentially would go to the planning board if there's site plan approval, right?
But there is no site plan.
But my
Right, I
point is
understand.
that there has to be, I'm assuming that there's some sort of regulation that deals with accessory structures in non-residential zones, otherwise you could put them literally. in
So we
my-
almost have to say it's not a permitted accessory structure, otherwise we can't. Because there's no site plan approval required for this, because it doesn't increase the parking demand. It doesn't trigger a site plan in front of the planning board.
So,
It
They have- you
means
have
we
to say-
means we have a defective ordinance is what it really means.
which,
Which-
that's a different.
That's
Which I'm not
conversation,
arguing, but I'm saying,
Right?
but we have a,
I mean, they've noticed for D variance and C variance from 606.7C, which is specifically any other use which is subordinate and customer incidental.
So, my suggestion, and I don't know if this is something that the applicant is amenable to. So, given the catch-all provision in the applicant's notice, what the board could do, under section 70B in the municipal land use law, is to, in essence, undertake an interpretation as to whether the board believes that this use is accessory to a principal use of the lot, meaning that it is customary, incidental, and subordinate, meaning all three. Remember, we dealt with this on another application. If you decide that it is, then arguably the applicant would not require any form of relief from the board. However, we, as a board of adjustment, would be able to quote unquote rule on that by making that interpretation, and then the applicant can go their merry way, and they've filed an application for something and the board has granted some form of relief. If you decide that it's not customary, incidental, and subordinate to a principal use on the lot, then in the alternative, the applicant, and has provided certainly proofs throughout their application on the plan, in support of a use variance for an accessory use, if you decided that it wasn't customary, incidental, and subordinate. So, Mr. Cercillo. you're sitting here patiently and you're hearing all this and you see my consternation regarding jurisdiction and all that kind of business. Do you have any thoughts?
The one thought I had was that the reason this needed to be before the board was because it was an exterior refrigeration unit. It was that element.
I agree that because it's an exterior refrigeration unit, that the board or the applicant could say, well, I don't know if that's really customary, right?
Oh,
Whether
no,
it's,
the
No, no,
applicant says it is customary, but that's,
but
we didn't win that argument with.
right, so,
Zoning
so if the zoning officer made a determination that, I don't know if it's really customary until the applicant comes before the board, and the applicant can do whatever they want, they can, disagree with the zoning officer, they can ask for interpretation, they can seek use variance, we have certain powers. So I guess, having heard, unless the board has any other thoughts, at least in terms of procedure, what do you want the board to do? And
Can I
need to
confer
know-
with my team?
Of course.
What I would ask for some clarification is, I think the idea of interpretation is satisfactory. However, though, you mentioned if not, then it's a D1. That's what I'm puzzled about.
Well, so if you look at the municipal land use law,
I
under
have-
section
I have.
70D1, right, it says a use
Or principal
or
structure.
principal structure.
It's not a principal structure.
I know it's not a principal structure. If you look at the case law, I am confident that a D1, as Mr. Keller is smirking because he knows, a D1 use variance can also include an accessory use that's prohibited. If you want to have a use, I've been involved in many cases that have been up in the courts.
I recall our,
Including-
I recall
including-
our discussion.
Right,
About
that,
this
that,
case.
that if in a lot of cases turn on, well, is this accessory use really accessory? Is it customary in the area? And there's like the chicken coop case, I've been involved in the Hell Stop case, I've been involved, so the point being is that you need a D1 use variance for an accessory use, post-accessory use, that is deemed to not be permitted in the zone. And it would be deemed not permitted if either it's not expressly permitted as an enumerated accessory use, or as you cited or Rich cited, 6067C, it's not customary, incidental, and subordinate. That's the rules of the game. The reason why municipal land use law, it says use or principal structure, that's where an applicant, like this case, needed to go in and get a D1 use variance for having two principal structures on a lot.
Which,
You already got that.
we already got that.
I'm not,
Oh, right.
that's right. So what I'm suggesting is that seek interpretation as to whether it's customary.
I
Right.
find that satisfactory.
And, but if the interpretation doesn't go your way, and that's not a 5-person vote, it's just an affirmative vote of the board, then you would, in the step 2, because now the board has determined that it's not an accessory use, it's not a permitted accessory use, then you would say,
Or accessory structure. You keep saying use.
because it's a use. It's a use of the lot. Structures
But
are.
so is a refrigeration inside the building, the main building. That's a use, that's a use too. That's not principally permitted. What's permitted is selling goods, food goods. And that's incidental and customary to have a refrigeration unit. What's unique is it's outdoors. But there's no, in the zoning district, in the zoning ordinance, There's nothing governing accessory structures in a non-residential area.
In terms of bulk restrictions, you still have to demonstrate, my advice to the board is that they should determine, I don't care which way they go, whether the outdoor detached refrigeration use on the lot is customary, incidental, and subordinate to the principal food use on the lot. That's my legal advice to the board. If the board determines that it is not, that they've ruled on the use, they determined that the use is not customary, incidental, and subordinate, in which case you would have a proposed prohibited accessory use on the lot. And then you would ask the board, like you presented the proofs for in your application at length, well done, for a use variance for an accessory use. That's my advice to the board, and I think that gets you where you actually initially, what you initially applied for. That's what I suggest.
We're in agreement with that.
Do you have anything further on your end?
Not at this time, no. Were there any other questions that
Yes.
the board would have? Yeah, so.
Anyone from the board have any questions?
I have a question for Rich.
Sure.
Back to the compressor,
Mhm.
how many times a day does it go on and the duration each time? And then is there a way to flip the refrigeration unit so that the compressor is in the back and the sound is muffled closer to the bakery?
Operationally, it'd be very difficult to spin that around and have the doors, because I couldn't screen the doors if they're gonna face the public. So the doors are on the back of the unit, directly facing the building. So they're on the backside here, so they can come out the doors and run product back and forth between the refrigerator when it's open. If I flip it, I can't screen it. And then secondly, it just becomes a production nightmare because of be running back and forth that additional distance. I don't know, I would suspect that the compressor runs most of the time. I don't know that it ever goes off per se. I don't know if it cycles on and off like you would a residential because they use it for freezing. So I suspect it's on most of the time.
Is this unit exclusively for freezing, this detached unit?
No, it's a dual.
Dual.
It can be, if production only needs refrigeration, then it would go into refrigeration mode, which then it would cycle on and off periodically depending upon the needs. But I think for refrigeration, it probably runs most of the time.
So if you look at the refrigeration units behind Goldberg's, they look like refrigeration units. This looks like something fell off a cargo ship and stuck a roof box.
It's kind of what it is. I mean, yeah, look, that was different application. Technically, an alternative, we could attach this to the main building, then we probably need site plan approval, but we need no bulk variances at all. We would need no use variance at all. It would be a planning board issue before the planning board, because by putting a structure over it, cover over and attaching the cover to it could be the same exact unit. I could just cover it with 4 posts and a roof, tie it back into the building. I would pick up some additional building area, which would probably necessitate a parking deviation, although you're grandfathered in the downtown for a certain number of spaces anyway. So it might rise to the need of site plan approval, but it would not need a use variance. So there are a number of different ways we could look at this. Obviously, the built-in unit at behind Goldberg's, it does look like a refrigerator. It's screened for the most part. Unfortunately, a lot of other stuff gets outside of that fence in the back area by the river, but it is screened. Our idea is that once this is screened, you won't see that container that fell off the container ship anymore. It'll be screened. It'll be an attractive screen.
Quick question. The doors, I walked around the unit tonight, but I couldn't find the doors, if they were obscured somehow, but I'm sure there are doors. So the doors face the front of the business?
The doors, there are 2 doors. They're kept locked quite often, but there's 2 doors that open out towards the building.
And they're open during the day,
Well, they're unlocked during the day. They're not open because it's a freezer, but
they're
they
locked during the day.
can be, depending on production needs and the use, but sometimes they're locked. I was there at 9 this morning, they were both locked, but there was production going on inside. I imagine if they have product they need to freeze, they'll unlock it, move it in. If they're not gonna use it the rest of the day, certainly before they go home, they'll lock it.
So that was my next
And it's
follow-up
visible-
question.
it's
What is
visible
the
from
security of the
production.
unit, which because it's external, it does have, in my mind, a little bit of safety concern for public safety.
The doors are kept shut, they're difficult to open, and there is visibility from production inside to the doors at all times. So if somebody were to walk up that and start to monkey with the door, the people baking inside would certainly see that someone was monkeying around with the unit.
Because you're not that far from the middle school.
Couldn't get any of those middle schoolers to come up and buy hamburgers when it was the Teddy's Garage, but yes. Yeah, no, I get it, it could be an attractive nuisance, but most of the times I've been there, the doors have been locked. And I imagine that's the normal protocol, but if they are unlocked, the doors would still be shut at all times. And it's a physical, you have to lift it up, turn it and swing open the metal doors. If anyone was to do that, as I said, the production staff inside would be able to see that.
Were permits off the electricity?
Pardon me?
Were permits off the electricity?
I did think they were. Again, when this came in, it was temporary, and so it was during the pandemic. So we did get permits, but since it was temporary, we didn't seek approval from a board because we didn't think it was going to last as long.
You know, one other comment that I neglected to mention. So in 2008, this property received site plan approval as well as a use variance for having the two principal uses on the lot. We talked about that a moment ago. So there's a case called the Raspberries case that basically says that if you have, you know, either a pre-existing non-conforming use or a use that received variance relief, right? And then you basically make the lot, in the Raspberries case, you made the lot smaller, they did a subdivision. And the ruling was, well, look, we granted a use variance for this lot, for this use, but now we're cutting the lot essentially in half, and now there's less space available for that previously prohibited use, so it's technically considered an intensification or exacerbation of the nonconformity, and you need more relief. So the point I'm making here is that because you're adding a detached, even though it's just a refrigerator with a compressor, that technically you are providing less space on this lot for the two principal uses that previously received use variance relief. So that's something for the board to sort of consider, I think, legally in terms of working through this application. We're not trying to complicate it. It's not a complicated application, but I think it bears mentioning about that facet of the law in terms of previously granted use variances and then adding, in this case, a structure, albeit an accessory structure, to the lot.
Any other questions for Mr. Keller? Any questions from the audience, Mr. Keller? Any comments from the audience regarding this case? Did I close the public portion? Board members, what are your thoughts?
Ross,
So-
can I
Yeah.
ask, so as I think about this, I mean, to me, refrigeration units seem subordinate, and I don't have any issue with either of those. Interesting others do, but to me, it seems pretty clear it's subordinate. It's the customer, right? And so, what is the legal definition of customary in this context? We have one external refrigeration unit in town. I'm not an expert in this, but I would think, and there's testimony to the effect that this kind of external refrigeration exists in other towns in Essex County. How do I think about whether that's really customary or not from a legal perspective?
So, great question. So the law says that to determine whether something is customary, you don't just, and I actually used this example literally last week, you don't just drive around the zone and you count basketball hoops and say, oh, well, there's 57 basketball hoops in driveways or on macadam, and so therefore, there's a lot of them, and so therefore, it must be customary. But yet, I'm looking for a bocce court, and I don't see a bocce court anywhere in Milburn's, whatever it is, R5 zone. And so therefore, it can't be customary. So the law doesn't say that you are necessarily restricted to the zone or even the town, because every use, every accessory use is different. So I mentioned the heliport, right? I've been involved in heliport cases. There are not a lot of heliport cases, a lot of heliports, in Milburn. Are there a lot of heliports, more than you think, in Somerset and Hunterdon County? Absolutely, right? So it's sort of based on, what's generally out there in the community. And you can define the community as the zone, you can define the community as the township, and you can define the community as Essex County, right? As I was asking Mr. Keller. So you can make your own determination as to that, but you shouldn't feel that you're restricted by just, how many exterior, external refrigeration units do I see in downtown? That doesn't end the criteria.
Well, I think that's very helpful. So then from my perspective, that seems like there is some support in the record that this is customary within that some broad definition of what customary means. This unit has already been there for a substantial period of time, and there's some very good questions about safety issues and sound, but it doesn't seem like anybody's been complaining about that. So, from my perspective, it seems to me that this is something that's important to the business, and the business is important to the town. I don't think it's not even going to be visible in many respects. So I actually think that it's something that I would be willing to agree.
As via interpretation as
Yes, that it's customary.
incidental and
Incidental
subordinate,
and
and therefore it's a permitted accessory.
Yes.
Can I ask further follow-up questions on the definition of customary, just to pick your brain? So if a customary is defined as it exists anywhere, customary?
Not necessarily, no. So if you've driven around Essex County, for example, and you've only seen one detached refrigeration unit in all the business zones in Essex County, I would say to you that under those set of facts, that you would, easily be able to find that it's not customary. Because it's like, oh, here's this one off, and is that even legal, right? So that's part of the criteria.
So I'm hung up on the fact that this is a unique property, that there are residents really close to this refrigerator. So for me, customary includes a lot of things, not just that one other one exists in town, or many exist in Essex County perhaps, which I don't actually know that. But do any exist where there's residents within, honestly, 30 feet? I'm guessing. So for me, and I realize every property is unique, customary involves so many elements. Not just do they exist anywhere, does one exist anywhere in Essex County
Right,
or even over?
So let me interrupt you, and then it does get a little complicated. So I do not believe that this board should take into consideration, in terms of the issue of custom, whether there is a two-family house on this lot. The issue of customary is always in relation to the principal use on the lot, because that's what it's accessory to, the principal use on the lot. However, what I mentioned to you 5 minutes ago about this Raspberries case, and they received the use variance because they had these two principal uses on the lot, and now you're adding something to the lot that's in essence intensifying the use of the lot. There's more stuff going on this lot. And I think that feeds into your concern more than the issue about whether it's customary. So the board could determine that, you know what, I find that I agree with Gary, and it's customarily associated, there's enough detached units. However, the fact that on this particular lot, you now have two principal uses that receive the use variance, and now you're adding something to, in essence, intensify these uses that receive variance relief. I think that that requires a form of use variance. And then they would have the same proofs that they've already put forward in the paper.
Further thoughts? So I struggle with this I think it is an intensification of the use. You know, we started this with approved as a restaurant, now it's turned into a production facility. Yes, it's for food. And now we're adding a refrigeration unit in the front, which, you know, in Milburn, we don't see a lot of refrigerators in front of the building. So when you walk up to the business, whether it's Goldberg's, yeah, it's typically in the back. There's another one I know of in town, but Mr. Keller missed it. That's Pete on Essex. They have an outdoor unit, but that is in the back. So there's not too many you walk up to where it's in the front. So that's sort of where I'm struggling a bit with this. It is loud, and I realize that the neighbor's not here to complain about it, but this thing is loud. So I'm not totally sure where I am with this. I'm struggling a little bit with it.
I think it is a different layout than Goldberg's or Pete on Essex, right? I mean, if those entities put a refrigeration unit in the front, it would essentially be on Essex Street. They could do it anyways, but
Yeah, it's not
just given
really
the
feasible.
nature of the property and the size of the lot and where this structure, the larger structure is where the business is taking place, that's set back substantially from the road. So I agree, it's somewhat unusual perhaps that it's in front, but I think it's different than a scenario where you had a business that was facing or very close to the street.
Right. Is that a good look for the downtown now? To
You
see
can't
it
even
go
see
up.
it, you wouldn't really see it.
Well,
How many people are seeing it?
enough that we're sitting here now.
Well, it's screened. Proposing screening.
Are there consistent hours that it's on versus off? Because I visited it later in the day and I didn't hear anything.
Probably reaches 10 and shuts off because it turned cycled when I was there.
Really?
Yeah, Mr. reaches 10
So
and
it's
shut
like
off while I was
on.
running and then
Okay,
shut off.
okay.
So,
I have a
Yes.
motion to open the public portion of the meeting.
make a motion to.
And second.
Second.
I just spoke with the owner, who told me that in a sense, once the doors were kept shut and they're maintained shut, it does cycle on and off only as needed. So once it's insulated, and so once the doors are shut, it doesn't go on that often. But if they're open and they're open for any period of time, it needs to get back to freezing. So I was incorrect before in that it does cycle on. I was here this morning, 9 o'clock. They must have just been in it because it was on. But it doesn't run continuously all day.
No, it cycled when I was there, so I heard.
Yep.
So, all right, I'll close the public portion. So any other further thought?
Actually, I have just one question. Was there any thought about putting the refrigeration unit behind the two-story frame building?
It's too
You
It's
wanted
too
it there
hard
with
to
that
fit.
setback?
It's too hard to fit back in there, just maneuver it to get it into behind the building. There's also,
You put the compressor in the back at that point too.
yeah, but there's it's not physically possible
Yeah, it's one of the spaces,
to squirrel it back there. It's only 8 feet to the
That is,
property
but
line.
but there's like little cutback in the front, right? Probably I should pick up 2 feet there, it's 10 foot width.
Yeah, you can't physically maneuver that in there without hitting the building, or it's too unwieldy to get back in there. And if you push it too far back in, then you eliminate the usability of the secondary means of egress.
Yeah, I'm not
back.
saying to push it all the way back, I'm saying that just put it in that, again, the game of Tetris, if you will.
Well, again, physically, it's not possible to get that back there. It would also then be closer to the rear kitchen area in one of the two family units. So we actually felt that besides being the easiest to get in, the owner biased it away from the residential units, so it would have no impact for them. But, and then with the screening, again, it is 50 feet back from the street, so it's not like it's on the street and it will be completely screened. But unfortunately, we did look at, we tried to look at getting some easement to put it on the next door neighbor, we couldn't get that. We tried looking at almost like a truck maneuvering template, you can't get it back there without hitting the building, either one of the buildings. And it's only I've got 8 foot and 1/8 of an inch from the building to the property line for an 8-foot unit, and there's a fence there, so you would have to take the fence down, and it wouldn't just fit. We did look at other alternatives before we looked at screening the existing location.
Smaller unit.
It's kind of what's necessary right now. So I don't know if there are smaller units available. I do know that
All the Goldbergs are 20 feet tall.
Or a custom unit?
they're side-by-side units. So the ones at Goldberg's, I think, they're side-by-side units.
Question about that for you. Are there manufacturers' guidelines about how close other structures can be, such as actually the business or the people in the apartment building? Are there manufacturers' recommendations for how much space there should be?
No, these maintain proper decibel levels, so they don't violate any noise laws. And by the way, there are second floor apartments over by Goldberg's. There are other apartments in the area that are close to these compressors or
That's-
residential or
yeah,
restaurant users.
Because I know when people try to put in their HVAC, there's ordinances addressing HVACs and generators that they have to be, and the manufacturers state they can't be near a window, there's all this
Yeah,
stuff. So I don't know if
that's
this
for,
has
that's for
similar.
exhaust on a generator. Yeah, there's all kinds of safety code issues. There's no such safety code issues with a compressor like this on it.
Okay, so the exhaust isn't problematic.
There is no real exhaust. There's an air exchange. There's no exhaust. It's not a combustion engine.
Okay, thank you.
This is a question for Mr. Susilo. Do you want Mr. Keller to provide some proofs in the alternative for a form of use variance relief, or do you want him to wait and see how the
Yeah, I thought we were gonna go for the interpretation.
first? Okay, that's fine. So the board understands that we can go, and I think the interpretation also takes the form as to whether you believe that there's in essence an intensification of the use variance that was granted in terms of the two principal uses that would dictate the need for a form of use variance relief. And that would be the interpretation question, either on the issue of customary incidental subordinate, or whether it is an intensification. Either way would arguably require the need for a form of a use variance.
I would vote on that.
What is that?
I would vote on that.
Well, it's up to the board.
Okay, so
So we would make a motion.
Somebody would make a motion as to whether, well, you can do it in 2 parts. You can say, you can do the motion as to first customary incidental subordinate, and then you can do a separate motion as to whether you think it's intensification of the uses that were permitted by variance that would require an additional form of use variance. Or you could do it together.
I thought that if it's customary, incidental, and subordinate, then it has, and it.
Well, then it's a
has-
permitted
then it would
accessory
be
use.
A permitted
But
accessory
then the
use.
question is, in the alternative, whether if you have two principal uses that are not permitted other than by variance relief, by adding a third use, albeit accessory, whether that would amount to an intensification of the uses of the lot, which would trigger a use variance.
Sufficient, by definition, there is some intensification, but it has to be sufficient.
Right, not de minimis.
Rob, just one more question on customary. This is a business unit with an external refrigeration. Could this be compared to residential units, homes with external refrigeration, or does it have to be just business?
I think it should be business, because
Business to
this is business to business, yes. Yes, because this is for a commercial purpose
and it's sizable.
and it's sizable.
So I guess we can first, does someone want to make a motion as to this particular refrigerator being freezer, what have you, being customary, incidental, and subordinate to the actual primary business?
I will make the motion that the unit is customary, subordinate, and incidental to the primary business on the premises.
Is there a second?
Carry this.
Ashley Abigdor,
Yes.
Chandra Harjani,
Yes.
Gary Rosen,
Yes.
Regina Truitt,
No,
Joseph Caulfield,
Yes.
Jessica Glad,
Yes,
Craig Plantner.
No.
Okay, so now you've determined that the accessory use itself does not require any form of use variance. It's up to the board to determine whether that ends the issue or whether you wish to make a determination as to whether this additional accessory use, albeit accessory, permitted accessory, constitutes an intensification of the use of a lot that would separately trigger the need for a use variance, or you can determine not to.
How do we frame that question?
Well, I mean, it's
It's the second part of your interpretation.
right, would someone like to make a motion that the refrigeration unit is a intensification of use on the property?
Warranting,
Warranting a form of use variance relief.
May I speak? For a second motion to be made, it would have to be from the group that voted
In favor.
in favor of the interpretation. I think that's the end of the story. That's my legal opinion. It's the end of the story. That's the interpretation.
I don't agree with that. I don't believe it's just those who voted in favor of the positive interpretation. I think there could be a separate vote. But that's up to you.
Then we move forward with a separate vote on the intensification of use.
so you're asking for a motion?
Somebody would have to make it.
So I have to make a motion.
So I'll make a motion that this application represents an intensification of the variance use granted back in 2008.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Who seconded it?
I did.
Ashley
Ashley
Abigdor,
Yes.
Chandra Harjani,
Yes.
Gary Rosen,
I'm lost. So we are, yes or no?
I guess would be in favor of intensification of use.
Which would trigger the need for a
So
use
it's
variance.
sufficient to,
Trigger the need for use variance.
Yes.
Regina Truitt,
Yes.
Joseph Caulfield,
Yes.
Jessica Glad,
no,
Craig Plantner.
Yes. So next, we will move forward with what has been presented in front of us.
And wait,
I
and
present
to give the applicant an opportunity to supplement, so they've provided in great detail justification for a use variance under their written materials, including particular suitability, and the issue as to whether the negative criteria is met for this particular variance. But
Mr.
certainly-
Kell has not gone into that at all.
I said in the written materials, provided great detail, okay? I'm assuming, Mr. Cersillo, that you would like to have Mr. Keller supplement that via
Yes.
testimony.
Yes.
Great. So as we shift gears and we look to the use variance, we did provide an outline for the use variance in the written material. With regard to the so I would also point out, the interesting thing is, I wish my client back in 2008 had listened to us, because if we had just done a subdivision line, we wouldn't have this issue. And there is no minimum lot size, there's no minimum setbacks. So if we had carved out a lot line around the two-story, this would not be an issue. So it's an unusual condition where we have a two-family house on the property. But there are other residential uses throughout the downtown, whether they be on top of restaurants, second-floor apartments. Some of the two-family, even so a couple of one-families across the street and a little further to the west. So we do have a number of existing residential users that are in close proximity to commercial use, including restaurants with AC compressors, et cetera, including close to Goldberg. So it's not uncommon. With regard to the
And
positive
by the way,
criteria.
Can I
Yep.
maybe help a little bit?
Yep.
So the board has determined that the accessory use is permitted,
Correct.
right? So the question in terms of the use variance is solely adding to the use that was permitted by use variance.
Correct.
Good.
All right, so essentially municipal land use law says that in order to meet the positive criteria, we need to show that we advance any of the purposes of zoning under 4055 D2. And then specifically, we must address, in addition to any other sections that we advance, we need to also demonstrate that the site is particularly suited for the proposed use, and or in this case, the proposed expansion, and that meets the general welfare or Part A under 4055 D2. We believe that this site is particularly suited for the proposed accessory use. The street line is, as I said, is defined by the two-family house, so we're not in a front yard. We are clearly in a side yard where accessory structures are permitted. That, as we indicated in the photos and our testimony, that two-family house actually blocks completely the view of the existing and what we're hoping to keep as the refrigeration unit. When the rest of the block is developed, the vista coming west on Essex Street will also be fully blocked. Currently, it's partially blocked by the construction fence. And we're proposing to do, and we've set that back 51 feet from the street to the compressor unit, 55 feet to the principal unit. So it's well back from the street. The screening, as well as the screening, will help to abate any of the sound from the compressors we indicated in my corrective testimony. The compressor, once the unit is shut down, which means at night when no one's going in it, the compressor will run far less often than it would during the day. It is an insulated unit. The unit is as far back from the street as we can get it. It's biased as far away from the residence as we can get it. There is no increase in coverage on the site. It's already covered, so there's no negative impact associated with additional runoff, things like that. So we think that this site is particularly proposed for this additional external use due to its configuration, the location of the existing pavers, our ability to get it set back from the street, and the likelihood that we're going to have another building that will come in and continue to screen that. And as I said, the likelihood is when that happens, there's a good likelihood that this may be part of that application. At that point, we can add a second floor. There are a number of things that can happen in the future. In the instant case, though, we think that the arborvitae screening will not only make the site more attractive, which enhances the aesthetics of the site, but it'll also and through that aesthetics, right now as you come down, this refrigeration unit actually helps to block view from the apartment to the transformer unit that's in the back. If you stand in that gap between the doors and the building, you're looking right at the side of the PSE&G switching station and transformer station. So it actually blocks a view of a pretty industrial look until such time as that building gets built on the vacant lot at 251. So I certainly think there's an aesthetic enhancement to the site just by having it there to help block that view. And then certainly what we're proposing will be, we'll go to the negative criteria to make sure it has no negative impact on the community. With regard to the negative criteria, we think that, let me go back to my other testimony here. I would point out also advancing general welfare in this is that Live Breads has been a valuable, highly successful business within our community. And this allows them to maintain the demand from both Milburn residents and the many people who come to our town because they find out about Live Breads from the kiosk and they want to find out what else is on the menu. They come to our downtown. It creates shopping opportunities for Peel and Essex, for Academia, for Fiamma, as well as a lot of the shops. This also does bring people, when they have pickup, it brings people down towards the bookstore, brings people down towards Paper Ribbon Wrap, which moved out of the downtown after flooding, and they struggle a bit with hoping for more foot traffic, which this generates on the weekends, and certainly will be generated when the Wells Fargo site is completed in development. So there's going to be a lot more foot traffic on there. This user in town helps to make us a better community. And it should be, I want to be careful here. This is an existential item for LibReds. They have made a big commitment to town. They want to stay in town. They've been wooed. I've known Yaniv for 6 years now. Known him before we did his application here. Their operation has been wooed by many other downtown development business districts. They'd like them to move, close this operation, move to other communities. I would hate to see them do that. They have been an anchor in this block. They have this block and the block where their 184 site has been much neglected with the collapse of the complete streets. It was never completed. It really has been an anchor and helped this area to thrive where it previously floundered. So I think this is it's always a benefit to the community when we keep a successful business in town and we let them continue to service the needs of the community. With regard to the, this, I would also point out that a significant amount of the employees that work for LibReds between their three operations come from the town of Millburn, both high school students as well as returning either summer college students or returning students that come home and they're home for a few months or a year before they move on. They're at their parents' house. So they are a labor pool also for the community, which I think also advances general welfare. With regard to the improved aesthetics, as they said, the plaza will improve from the landscaping. With regard to the negative criteria, it's always in two prongs. First, there's no negative impact to the public, and there's no substantial detriment. Not that there isn't detriment, but there's no substantial detriment to the public good, and there's no substantial impairment to the intent and purpose of the master plan and zoning ordinance. With regard to the public good, the two-family house, as I said, blocks the refrigeration from the west. It's been moved far enough away from the units. As indicated, the landlord of this property would not have let LibReds put that there if they were getting any complaints from the two residents in the two-family dwelling as a businessman. And only since it's been there did he allow this to stay, because there's been no complaints by those. It's from what the landlord has told me, but certainly it would not be good business sense for the landlord of this property to allow this to be there if it compromised the living quality of the residents within the building.
Rich, can I interrupt you for a second? How long has this refrigeration unit been there?
Since just before Christmas of 2021.
So early December of 2021.
Correct.
So, and during that time till now, aside from the two family, has there been any complaints from any surrounding neighbor?
You might be surprised to know that Carrie Heller has inquired about it, but Carrie Heller inquires about a lot of things. Carrie Heller owns the building where the Starbucks is and is now renovating the old Charlie Brown site. So he has asked whether that needed site plan approval. It didn't. He made inquiries about it, and that's when the town got after us and saying, hey, it doesn't seem like it's temporary any longer. We said, yeah, it has changed, and now we've come forward. But there's been no complaints about it. Thank you. So the master plan, so we think that there's really no detriment. Again, the compressor does come on. It may not be as quiet. It will be quieter, and it only comes on when needed, so it's not going to be on as much at night. With the master plan, the primary goal is to encourage, goal number 1 on our 2018 master plan is to encourage appropriate land uses to promote the character of the township as a small suburb of the highest quality. Goal number 4 is to maintain and enhance economic vitality of the downtown and other business districts. We think that this certainly does that. And objective 4.04 is to strengthen existing business centers, including the downtown core and other business areas. LibReds has continually made a commitment to the community. into this section of the B4 district. They've been good tenants and want to continue to be so. However, the inability to store product in a refrigerated space or freezer space would be an existential threat to their existence in Millburn. We feel that the location of the unit, in conjunction with the proposed screening, meets the criteria in support of the variance. We hope that you'll approve it and keep this value business in town, recognizing that there is a finite time. Eventually, this site will be developed, and at some point, we'll find another solution. But for right now, we're asking this board for the relief request.
Any other questions for Mr. Keller? Any questions from the audience for Mr. Keller? Comments? I will close the public portion once again. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So you mentioned that this was, external refrigeration was put in late December 2021.
Correct.
Was there no approval required at that time to put it up?
Well, we consulted with the zoning officer, as indicated. They did get all permits for inspection for electrical. We consulted with the zoning officer, and at the time when it was temporary, there are fewer restrictions on temporary items. So whether it's temporary accessory stuff on a residential, like something that can be moved. In this case, we thought it would be there for about 6 months. We knew there was a supply chain issue.
Gotcha.
But, like all people, when you put an addition, you immediately occupy it, don't know how you ever live without it. Their demand has outstripped. I mean, if you think about what it takes to produce 3,000 challah is what they'll go through in a holiday period, or 3,000 of the chocolate babka. There's a high demand from within the community and people who visit the site. They are respected throughout the country. People come in from all over the place for them, and they attract people to our town who tell me they never knew about Millburn until they saw it at the kiosk, and we were then found out about the downtown location, and oh, what a nice community. I have clients who I've taken to here, taken to the Standard, take them over here for a coffee, and they become Millburn fans and they come back. So it's been a great opportunity, but unfortunately, it's what they need to meet their quota at this point. And the demand comes largely from the community, or it comes a lot from the community.
Any other questions? So now I'll close public portion. So board members, what you have in front of you now is an application for proper screening here of this unit. So if we were to permit it, I would recommend the condition that this screening be maintained in perpetuity. Any other comments, thoughts, or otherwise, if you're in favor of this being?
So I'm struggling with this application, obviously, from comments I've said previously, but I am also very concerned about the safety concerns with the doors being open during the day. The employees are inside. I would like to know what kind of security enhancements they would have to make sure that no one wanders into that unit that should be there, and I haven't heard anything other than the people inside.
Well, they would certainly, and I think it would be appropriate, and I think there's representations already by the applicant that they're gonna have, appropriate security so that they don't want anyone coming in there to steal anything or have mischief take place in there, especially given the fact that the doors are facing the main
What
operation.
he said is the employees inside would keep an eye out.
Well, no, it is a freezer, so there's no reason why they want the doors open, ever. I mean, it's to go in.
He said they're just
get what they
unlocked.
need. I'm sorry?
He said they were unlocked.
Correct, but it's just to go, they're not gonna leave the doors open, like wide open or something.
Right, but they're unlocked. And it
So-
is it's a large external refrigerator, which even though there's one other in town, it isn't unusual.
But I think the countervailing issue is that they're not facing the main public right of way, they're facing the rear, they're in the rear of the property, and they're facing directly into the main
I would
operations.
feel better if there's an alarm of some sort.
It's only an issue, I mean, I don't close the public portion, it's only an issue if that door locks and somebody gets trapped in the freezer. But if you go into the freezer and you can walk out.
That's actually a good question, if you go into the
Well, it's
freezer.
kind of, it's a truck style system in the back of it. So basically, you have the two latches that open up, and then the door opens, as the wing door opens. It's a typical barn door type of operation. When I was there was a padlock on it.
Right, it is after business hours.
It was 4 o'clock, so the operation was closed when I was there. And it was locked. So, as for safety, I mean, that's what I do. Very often you go to Goldberg's and the gate's open and their freezers are right there too. So if someone wants to tamper with something, they are trespassing and they can certainly go have a good time. So,
Yeah, that would not be a legitimate reason, frankly. I think under the law, to deny the application, you could certainly
It's just a
impose.
suggestion
Yeah, but
for,
I'm saying you can
Yeah.
impose a condition
Yeah.
that
Right.
the applicant ensure, safety and security of the
That's-
access.
that was the question, I think, that Craig proposed, so that's why I brought it up. Yeah.
any other thoughts on this? Conditions? So then, I'm not sure how you want to, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know, I was gonna ask, so if we're making a motion in favor of it, we would be making a motion in favor of approving the intensified use.
You
On the
make a motion
property.
to approve, D1 variance for this use with conditions.
Okay.
And so far, those conditions are maintaining in perpetuity the hedging. And I'm not really sure how to phrase this safety thing, so that's something you'd have to concoct.
Well, let me just kind of help. I assume the applicant would agree as a condition, should it be approved, that they would ensure safety and security of the access to the refrigeration. Correct? Yes.
Okay.
There you go. So it's a representation.
Thank you.
So with that,
And just remind the board that because it's a use variance, it requires 5 affirmative votes.
so with that,
Can I ask a further question about intensification of the variance? Can you tell me a little bit about what the burden of proof is, or what is our job in interpreting the intensification?
Well, intensification varies. So as Mr. Keller testified, you have to look at what's going on there, what the intensification consists of, and the impact on the surrounding area. So what do we have here? First of all, we don't want to have anyone objecting. We have commercial uses surrounding it, including a garage area in the rear. We have a refrigeration unit that is a permitted accessory use, albeit it's added to the lot. You have testimony that there's been no complaints and no issue with functionality of the two-family home vis-a-vis the existing business, right? So it's not like, and it's not open to the public, which is a big plus, because it's not like you're adding a particular use where all of a sudden it's going to generate more vehicles and there's going to be issues with circulation problems in ingress or egress, or this is requiring that their hours of operation are going from 8 to 6 to 8 to 11, right? So basically, variances come in all shapes and sizes. And I would argue that here, although it technically requires a variance, a use variance, that given that it's a permitted accessory use, that it's not open to the public, that it's relatively small in size, that is facing the main building use, it's not generating any traffic, it's not generating any increased hours of operation, that on the spectrum, Regina, it's on the low side.
Didn't he say it is open to the public though, occasionally for pickup?
Yeah, but that's, it's not open.
The building is,
Right.
not the refrigerator.
No,
Right, the building
refrigeration.
is open to the
Yeah,
public.
but that's already done.
Right.
Okay.
Right, this is just a refrigerator.
you're not coming to visit the refrigerator, let's put it that way.
Yeah,
So-
well, although I did today. But-
Although I am biting my tongue to finally, after 32 years, make a Brady Bunch reference. I don't know if
I
you
know.
ever saw that
Oh,
episode.
please do.
Peter
Right?
got stuck
Peter got
in
stuck in the freezer.
No,
Greg got
see.
stuck,
Oh.
Greg got stuck in the
I
freezer.
finally did it, I can retire and I was so happy.
There you go, finally.
So,
Yes.
all right, well, in that case, can I have a motion in this case, including the hedging?
The screening to be maintained in perpetuity, the applicant would ensure safety and security of the access. Thank you.
So moved.
Can I have a second? Second.
Ashley Avigsor,
Yes.
Chandra Harjani,
Yes.
Gary Rosen,
Yes.
Regina Truitt,
Yes,
Joseph Schofield,
Yes.
Jessica Glad,
Yes.
Craig Plantner.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Good luck with keeping your refrigerator.
Yeah.
Is there any other topics to discuss outside of what was on the agenda this evening? In that case, I have a motion to adjourn.
Second.